Drench resistance is a concern in livestock industries and research organisations. A 5-year MPI Beef and Lamb New Zealand project began in 2008, involving 20 farms. Issues affecting livestock performance were identified, in particular parasite treatments and management. Following this, a plan was developed for individual farms. The project's findings are now being analysed and shared.
The project we're talking about is what we call best practice parasite management. And it was a study that came out of some discussion we're having way back in 2007, 2008. We were concerned about the level of anthelmintic resistance, drench resistance on sheep and cattle farms. The aims and goals we set ourselves were that we wanted to be able to look at changing practices on farm in terms of parasite management practices on farm in a way that would be more sustainable. And we wanted to be able to do that in a way that ensured that at the end of the project we still had the drenches working as well as they were at the start.
Steve Wynne Harris runs bull beef Friesians and a sheep stud. He's a former Hawke's Bay Farmer of the Year and from 2000 to 2004 was a meat and wool New Zealand monitor farmer.
I didn't put my hand up, it was twisted, and I think they were keen on me because I'd already done a series of fecal leg count reduction tests, so I had a history and I pretty well knew, not entirely, but I had a good handle on what my status was in terms of resistance to the various drenches. The project added, for a start, there was a bit of intellectual grunt there with Bill Pomeroy, Tony Rhodes, Richard Lee earlier on, and then Richard Hilson, so some really good brains who knew what they were talking about, because it's very complex, particularly when you start looking at the different species of worms, which ones are resistant to which drench. It's about being able to use effective drenches which are doing the job. There's no point, that's the other big cost of resistance, of course, is using drenches that are ineffective and not knowing it. So you're just wasting your money, you might as well pour the drench down the drain. I know that my worms have been controlled by using the right drenches, so that gives me the confidence that there's no production losses. So that's definitely been a big advantage. Using the triples and using one of the new actives as a clean out drench or a nuke drench, using that in about March or April, that's quite an expense to put that through all the lambs, but that cleans out any potential resistant worms that are just lurking inside the animals. So that costs you a bit more, but I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think there was returns. It did require a bit more work, taking fecal leg counts and posting them off, but you just get used to that system. So I was doing that pretty regularly on both sheep and cattle, and then you'd get the results back. It wasn't too onerous, and it was interesting. I enjoy doing science. I'm interested in science, and it's good sort of being on the cutting edge. Get up, good boy. I was already aware of refugia as a strategy in extending these drenches and their efficacy. That was a big part of the program, and it's quite hard. You've been trained, as a young fella and all the way through most of my career to make sure you drenched everything up the race, and did I drench that lamb or not? Oh, well, I'll give it a second squirt just to make sure. So this is a complete about change.
Refugia is just one of the tools in the toolbox in respect to good parasite management, but it's a pretty important one. And so it's about the way in which we think about keeping a proportion of worms on the farm. We're never trying to eradicate worms. We're trying to keep a manageable proportion of worms on the farm and minimising those that have been exposed to selective treatment with the drench. Once you start to explain it in relation to the particular system that the farmer has got, then they quickly have been able to pick those sort of concepts up and think about, for themselves, think about ways in which they could make that work on their own farm. I think one of the really important things in the project is that we know that in terms of cattle, that orals seem to work every time, particularly in young stock. And there's much less variability in terms of the results. So in all the farms that have been involved in this project, cattle in their first 12 months of age only ever received oral treatments. In terms of sheep, then the preferred method is to use an oral treatment, which generally has a short active life. The problem with porons is that with all the evidence we have is that for some worm types or worm species, the results, they seem to be less effective, injectables as well. Secondly, as well as being less effective compared to an oral, they also seem to be much more variable between individual animals. And that's quite important from the point of view of potentially adding to selection pressure for resistance. Weighing animals, whether it's sheep or cattle, is really important. The first thing is, of course, it's telling you how well they're doing, especially if you've got some repeated or sequential weighing. Obviously, in relation to drenching stock, it's really important to know the sort of heaviest weights of the mob, heaviest animals in the mob, so you're actually giving them an appropriate dose rate for the heaviest animals and you're treating the mob as such. So weighing is important for two reasons: dose rate, but also giving a real handle. And often, animals may not have a parasite issue that's actually contributing to a period of poor growth rate. Could be a whole lot of other factors. The messages that we're talking about have been around in the scientific discussion or in discussion between vets and animal health advisors at various levels for quite a while. What we tried to do was to bring it all together at a practical level for a farmer in a way that was specific to their farm. So in every case, we sit down with the farmer and help them work through and think about what's it really mean to put these things in place on my farm year by year. That's what's different.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.